Yo guys, it's Vin, and welcome to the Ultimate Brawlhalla Movement Guide, remastered for 2025. But before we go to the training room, I wanted to give you guys a little warm-up. Even if you are a complete beginner and are not familiar with how Brawlhalla players usually move, I just want you to focus on how these two players are positioning themselves and what they are trying to accomplish with each movement. So when I play the video, keep an eye on this player, kyna. Let's give it a replay. Notice how he's moving in and out of Yu's attacking range, looking to bait out an attack. Doesn't work the first time, so he tries it again. Goes into the attacking range, which actually elicits a reaction from Yu's. Yu's goes in to try and punish it, but by that time, kyna is able to move out of the way, and while Yu's is still in recovery frames, kyna gets a punish. And for the last part of the stock, I actually want you to shift your attention to the other player, Yu's. Notice how he's not just staying on the ground, but he's also utilizing the vertical space to be able to bait out an attack from kyna. Let's watch it one more time. As you see here, he starts to jump here, returns to the ground, then he moves a little bit closer to kyna, actually really close to kyna, and again, starts to jump around in the vertical space. As we'll learn later, Hammer, the weapon that kyna is using, actually has a blind spot where it's a little bit difficult to cover the diagonal areas because it doesn't have an attack that can do that from the ground. So that might be a reason why Yu's is hanging around this area above kyna, looking for something here. Notice how he also uses the platforms to his advantage, using the map to your advantage to swing around and punish kyna's attack, sending him off stage. Notice how kyna uses the dodge first. We'll learn later that dodge is an extremely important Brawlhalla mechanic and is basically your only defensive option. So if you waste the dodge first, then it makes you completely vulnerable, which allows you to get a free edge guard here, which will eventually end in him getting the stock and resetting the bracket. In the first chapter of this video, I'm going to be talking about the basic fundamental mechanics of movement in Brawlhalla. But before I do that, I want to remind you guys the purpose of movement. Remember that Brawlhalla is a fighting game. The name of the game is hitting and KOing your opponent. So that should always be your top priority, and movement should supplement that. So the purpose of movement is to put yourself in a position where you can hit your opponent, right? It doesn't matter if you're inputting 1,000 actions per minute or literally, bot walking towards your opponent. As long as you can consistently find opportunities to hit your opponent, your movement is good. Now, the first thing that we should know about movement mechanics in Brawlhalla is that pivoting like this actually has 0 startup frames. In other fighting games, if you turn around at the wrong time, you may be punished while you're locked in an animation. This is not the case in Brawlhalla, so feel free to actually have seizures in game. The fastest way to move in Brawlhalla is not walking, it's not sprinting, and it's definitely not spamming dash, but it's actually a combination of dash jumping and fast falling. Something that looks like this, right? But before we get there, let's break down each part of your movement, starting with the absolute basics. When Brawlhalla players refer to their options, they're talking about these limited movement tools that are either replenished by touching the stage or on a timer. You have 3 jumps, 1 from on the stage, 2 from in the air, a recovery, which is an upwards heavy attack, and a dodge. When you use your last jump, so this one right here, you see red particles come out from underneath my character. And when I use all of my other options, including my recovery and my dodge, you see that sweat beads start to come out from my character. These are both important cues that you should keep track of in-game. Now, the dodge is arguably the most important option in your kit. You can do a neutral, or what is called a spot dodge, by hitting your dodge key without inputting any directions, right? Like this. You can do it on the ground or in the air. The aerial version makes you invulnerable for 0.3 seconds, and the grounded one a little bit less than that. If you're in the air, you can actually input a direction and do a dodge to get a directional dodge, which makes you invulnerable for 0.2 seconds. The difference between your dodge and your other movement options, such as your jumps and your recovery, are that the jumps and recovery are actually immediately replenished the moment you hit the stage, which includes the platform, the floor, and the wall right here, whereas the dodge is always on a timer. If you dodge on the ground, you can dodge again after 1 second. I'm spamming dodge right here, 1 second. Or if you dodge in the air without ever touching the ground, it took me 2.7 seconds to get my dodge back. Now the dodge timer is the basis for many reads in Brawlhalla. The next mechanic we need to know about movement in Brawlhalla is fast falling, which, is exactly what it sounds like. Holding down while you're falling to fall faster. Note that you can't fast fall if you hold down during the jump. So right here, I'm going to hold down and I'm going to jump at the same time. You see how I just slowly fall to the ground? I need to jump, and as I'm falling, then I input down, which will make me fast fall. This is an essential tech if you're a beginner, so I would actually take a lot of time to practice this because a lot of future movement techs will be reliant on your ability to fast fall consistently. And believe it or not, there actually is a little bit of nuance to fast falling in this game, because the delay between when you jump and can actually first input fast fall is slower after a jump versus when you dodge up and fast fall. So if you see here, I jump, and this is the first moment I can fast fall, right there, like that, kind of. And if I were to do a dodge up, I can immediately fast fall down after the dodge up. This is an advanced tech that we'll talk about in detail in Chapter 2. If you try to input a directional dodge on the ground, you get a dash. You can do it forwards or backwards, which would be called a backdash. Now, the backdash is slightly slower, and you actually can't chain a backdash into another backdash, at least not in the same way that you can chain forward dash into basically any other option in your kit, right? So in that sense, the backdash is slightly limiting to your movement. A tip I have for beginners is to make sure that once you decide to dash in a certain direction, so like for example, let's say the opponent, this guy, is attacking me and I want to move to my left to get out of the way, rather than just inputting backdash, which is perfectly viable. I can get away with a backdash perfectly fine. It's a slight optimization to turn around first and then do a forward dash or any movement using a forward dash, because it's a little bit more freedom. And remember that the backdash is a little bit slower, so you can get hit more easily. And there is also no startup delay for pivoting in this game. So master pivoting or like quick turning. So turn around and then dash rather than just doing a backdash, which is a little bit slower and clunkier. Yo guys, it's Vin from the future. Something I forgot to mention about dash is that if you dash and completely let go of all your movement keys, you see how far the momentum can carry you. You can actually cancel this momentum by holding in the backwards direction. So this kind of allows you to control the distance of how far you want to dash. Dashing is another essential tech in this game, just like dodging, not only because it allows you to move around a lot quicker, but it also influences the range of some attacks, which is called dash impulse. Basically, the momentum of certain light attacks and sigs are boosted when you do a dash right before them. So for example, Axe Sidelight would hit in a good range around here. But if I were to dash it, you see how the momentum is kind of boosted, and it basically covers half the entire stage. Knowing which moves have dash impulse is an important part of mastering your kit and having good movement, because it directly affects how you position yourself to hit your opponent. Now, if you combine forward dashes and back dashes, you get dash dancing. This is the main strength of the back dash, its ability to chain with the forward dash in quick succession. Now, this is one of the oldest movement techs in Brawlhalla, but in the modern day, with the addition of something called dash landings, which I'll talk about in Chapter 2 of this video, it's become a lot less prevalent. But it still is a simple and effective way to bait your opponent into whiffing an attack so that you can punish. For example, what I can do is I can dash forward towards him, maybe even a little bit closer, right outside of his range, to bait out an attack from him, backdash to get out of the range to make sure I'm safe, and while he's in recovery frames, I can punish him. If you're a complete beginner, I would suggest trying to learn how to implement dash dances in your gameplay, because it'll teach you movement, but also baiting and punishing, which is one of the primary ways to actually land hits on your opponent. Something to note is that you want to be dash dancing further away from your opponent, so that when you dash towards them, you're not already in their range of attack, so that if the Bodvar were to swing his sword right here, I wouldn't immediately get hit. Remember, the point is not to get hit by the attack, or to be so close that if they choose to hit that button, you're immediately going to get punished. You just want to get a reaction out of them, and then step back so you can punish them. So if I were to dash dance in a place right here, this would be an example of a bad position to be in, because the moment I dash forward, I'm locked into this animation, and if he were to attack me, I couldn't get out, or I couldn't escape it if I wanted to. Over here might be a better space to dash dance. It's a little bit safer. One last note is that when I say dash dancing, I don't mean that it should be your only movement option. You shouldn't just spam it like this. Like, this is something that Coslex used to do back in the day, right? Which is a perfectly valid strategy, but it's not something I recommend everyone would do, right? You can do just a quick one, just like this, or like a boom, boom, 1, 2, and then maybe mix in some of your other movement options like this, which we will actually be talking about right now. The final basic movement tech that I want to go over is dash jumping. This is, again, exactly what you think it is. You dash and you jump at the same time to get a dash jump. Once you get the hang of this, try to pair it with a fast fall on the way down, like this. Now you have a dash jump fast fall. This is actually the fastest way to move in Brawlhalla. And not only can dash jump fast falling be used to move around the stage, it can actually also be used to better position your aerial attacks. To illustrate this point, I have this clip here where, as you see, Sandstorm is in the red, so Marky is going to look for a kill option. Here, he hits the sidelight, sends him off stage, disarms himself with this weapon throw. Now that he's unarmed, his main kill option would be an unarmed recovery. So to set that up, he dash jumps into the recovery to read Sandstorm going high. He dash jump fast falls over to get the weapon, and once he picks it up, now he has gauntlets. His main kill option on gauntlets would also be a recovery. So in order to set this up, he dash jump fast falls and then recoveries to make it so that the recovery will cover an area closer to the ground, securing him the stock. In Chapter 2 of this video, I will be going over some more advanced movement mechanics. Now, sometime after I last left Brawlhalla, BMG implemented a huge change to dash, making it so that if you're close to the ground and you input dash, you can kind of snap to the ground, like so, and change directions the moment you land. Now, this is called a dash landing, and is the primary reason why I believe that dash dancing is becoming a little bit less prevalent in modern Brawlhalla. This is also the main reason why I wanted to make a remastered movement guide anyway. In terms of how to use this to effectively bait your opponent, you can dash jump towards them in order to bait out an attack, and then snap to the ground to get away, something like this, right? And then you can go back in for the punish while they're still in recovery frames. But what makes this better than dash dancing is that remember that dashes are a fixed animation, and that when you hit dash, you're locked into this animation, meaning that if you're in the wrong space or they decide to catch on, they can just hit you out of it. Also, not to mention, remember the back dash is kind of a little bit slower than a normal dash, right? Whereas with a dash jump, you can choose to change directions by snapping to the ground, so I could go back if I wanted to. I can actually also change the trajectory of my movement in the middle of the dash jump, which is something you can't do in the middle of a normal dash. For example, if I dash jump towards this Bodvar, and I realize that the Bodvar is getting ready to punish me, and it's not safe for me to land anymore, I can just jump again, right? Like this, and reset back to neutral. I can even do a dodge to dodge backwards to get out of the way, right? And all of these options are things that you can't do with a normal dash. See how I'm kind of locked in? If this Bodvar were to try to hit me, I would just get hit. I mentioned something called short hopping. Some players call this empty hopping. Basically, it's like jumping with single jumps and fast falling back down to the ground. And this is another way you can bait your opponent into hitting you. Again, dash landings are an effective way to bait your opponent here because you can immediately snap to the ground to get out of the way and then go back in for a punish. The combination of dash jumping, like this, and short hopping with dash landing, so snapping to the ground, this basically forms the backbone of modern Brawlhalla movement. And at the highest level, players are pretty much having to read where their opponent is going after every single dash. So if you're really trying to improve, I would spend a lot of time practicing your dash landings, like this, and how to effectively move using dash jumps and short hops. Another very strong and important movement tech related to dash in Brawlhalla is called X-pivoting. To keep it short, basically some light and heavy attacks, you can dash or dash jump and turn in the opposite direction when you do the attack to get momentum going in the opposite direction, right? So for example, Blaster Nair, X pivoted, throws out a big hitbox like this, and sends me in the opposite direction, whereas a normal Nair, I would just sink and fall to the ground here, which makes me pretty easy to punish, right? And another example would actually be Sword Endlight. If I were to dash and Endlight like this, it hits that area, but if I were to dash and turn around, it kind of swings me in the opposite direction like this. These are another ways that you can catch your opponent off guard. Now, X pivoting is pretty well known and used in pretty much all levels of play in Brawlhalla, right? But what actually is underrated is using X pivoted signatures. Now, for example, if I'm playing Jala, both of my side sigs have X pivot potential. The key thing to know here is that an X pivoted signature, which looks like this, right? I dash in one direction and I input side sig the opposite direction, covers basically the same area as a normal dashed side signature. So let's say that you're looking for a KO, it might be a good idea to try and mix in an X pivot signature, because the animation is something that not all players are looking out for or are prepared for, so it might just catch them off guard, and that might be enough to get you the stock. The next thing I want to talk about is ways that you can use your dodge to move. If you land an attack, you can perform what is called a chase dodge by dodging in your opponent's direction. You can also do this in the diagonal directions towards them, and you can always, no matter where you hit your opponent, do it up and also down, right? This propels you forward while invulnerable, so you can follow up with another attack or just get a better position and maintain pressure on your opponent. If you're on the ground when you first land the attack, you can actually do this twice, which gives you what is called a chain dodge. If my opponent is in kill percent or somewhat in red, and I send them far enough away to where I can't follow up, right, with another attack, I can still chase and chain dodge towards them to maintain pressure on them so that they can't just return to the stage for free, right? After being hit by the Nair, Sandstorm uses his first jump, then a recovery, then quickly uses his second jump as marckiemoo pressures him by moving up to him. Now that Sandstorm has no jumps, marckiemoo looks to catch the landing with a Nair here, gets this GC Endlight, and at this point, he chase dodges towards Sandstorm to maintain pressure on him, which actually draws a dodge out of Sandstorm, which this is actually his last option. Now, the only place for Sandstorm to go would be the wall, so marckiemoo can cover it with a simple edgeguard ground pound, securing the stock. The same concept applies for when you hit your opponent in the air. You can use your chase dodges to chase them upwards and maintain pressure on them, like this. Yo guys, it's Vin from the future again. One more thing I forgot to mention is that if you want to dash instead of doing a chase dodge after a hit, you can hold down into the ground and then dash. So here I'm holding just forward, and here I'm holding down forward in the down right direction. Next, I want to talk about gravity cancel. If you spot dodge in the air, you have a small window to cancel the dodge, cancel the invulnerability frames, and actually perform a grounded attack, but in the air. So as you notice, this was a sword D-light, which looks like this. If I tried to do the same thing without the gravity cancel, I would just get a dare. This tech can be used with light attacks, as we demonstrated. It can also be used with heavy attacks, like that. So for my beginner Brawlhalla players to actually input this, make sure that you're actually doing a spot dodge, not a directional dodge, right? Spot dodge, and then input directions on your input device to do the downlight. The way that you can practice this is by seeing how long you can actually delay the attack. So for example, if I wanted to do a D-light right away after the GC, I can go like that, right? See how quick that was, like this. Or I can delay it, which can be used to actually dodge an attack, dodge it, and then cancel it using my D-light to get the punish off. Another tip that I have is that if you want to reverse the attack when you do a GC, as in do it in the opposite direction, you can actually do the dodge first and then turn around to do the attack. This is useful for certain reads, like this really cool looking sword one, which goes like this. That was a side light into a dash jump, turn around, ground pound, down light, ground pound into a Sair. Now let's talk about some other ways that you can use your dodge for movement. Huge disclaimer, okay? Huge disclaimer. Remember that your dodge is your most important option in your kit. So if you don't actually have to use your dodge, or you don't have a good plan for using your dodge, you should probably just save it for actually escaping strings, right? If you dodge up then fast fall, like this, the delay between when you dodge up and can start inputting fast fall is ever so slightly faster than if you were to do a normal jump like this. If I do a dodge up, I can immediately start falling down with the attack. You see? A good example of when you might want to use this is if you're on axe and your opponent is in kill percent. If they attack you and you spot dodge it and cancel it into an end light, sure, that's some good damage, but it's not really going to kill them until super late health. So instead of spot dodging and canceling it, you might want to dodge up and fall down with a Sair. That has a lot more force and will end the stock a little bit more efficiently. To show this tech in action, I have this clip here where marckiemoo is going to avoid Sandstorm's Scythe end light using a jump and a dodge up. Notice here how instead of simply spot dodging it or dodging away and falling down with an attack, which would be a lot slower, he specifically jumps and dodges up to get through the end light and immediately starts falling down with a Nair punish. This is pretty much the fastest way that he could have possibly punished this move. This is actually one of the biggest downfalls of gold players who play heavy weapons like axe, hammer, or lance. If you want my best advice to get out of that specific rank, realize that when you're in kill percent, how many of them will just float around you looking for a falling Sair like this. This is super predictable. At the higher levels, players will walk up to you, use their movement to get close to you, right? And dodge your attack with a dodge up and immediately fast fall with a falling Sair. Another way that you can use your dodge is if you see your opponent committing to an attack, or at least if you're very confident that your opponent will commit to something if they see you in their attacking range, dodge through them onto the ground behind them and hit them with a grounded attack like that. Now, this is actually how a lot of hammer players actually end up hitting D-lights, right? They react to an attack, dodge through, and stomp Sair. Now, the problem with this is you really shouldn't be doing it too preemptively, right? You kind of want to react to an attack like that and dodge through it. One last way to use your dodge is by dash dodging, which is similar to dodging through them on the floor like we talked about before, but this time you're actually on the floor the whole time, sliding directly through them. And remember how I said with dash dancing, you kind of want to be kind of far away from your opponent so you're not immediately going to run into attack? Well, remember, the purpose of the dash dodge is to get through their attack. So you actually kind of want to be a little bit closer to them so that by the time you forward dash and dodge, you dodge through them, not in a place like this, right? See how the moment I come out of dodge, I'm right in front of them? This is a bad place to dash dodge. You want to dash dodge a lot closer to them. I personally wouldn't really recommend dash dodging, especially if you're in lower ranks, unless you're extremely confident that your opponent is going to have like a knee-jerk reaction and try to smack you the moment you get in their range, right? So something like this, if I know the Bodvar is going to attack when I'm in this range, I can actually run right at him and time my dash dance like that to get through it. Remember how I said before that when you dash dance, you kind of want to be far away from your opponent like this so you don't immediately get hit the moment you step in their range? But with this tech, implementing this mix-up, that's exactly what you want them to do, right? So if I set this Bodvar to attack, I want to be dash dancing really close to him so that I can time it and go right through him, right? So I'll either be going back and forth, and the moment that I know he's going to pull the trigger, I go forward through him, turn around, stomp Sair, like that. But even then, there are a lot better options that actually, don't use your dodge like that. Like you can just dash jump around them and look for a whiff and then stomp Sair. You really don't need to be using these techs to get to a high elo. But nonetheless, I mention it because it's never really a bad idea to expand your playbook. Because, even if you don't end up using these techs, right? If you don't end up using the things I talked about, maybe you see your opponent doing it and now you can identify it and know how to counter it. The next movement mechanic I want to talk about is called platform canceling or ledge canceling. Basically, if you input dash like this or dash jump the moment you pass through a platform, you get a pretty big burst of momentum off of it. You can also do this with certain attacks and strings. So as you see here, I did a sidelight nair d-light on axe. If I were to do it without the platform, I would have to do a sidelight nair into a GC d-light to get that follow-up. But since the platform is there, I actually save a few frames and the follow-up is a little bit quicker and harder to escape. The thing I want to say about this tech when it comes to movement is that you can really use it to mix up your opponent on maps that do have platforms, right? It adds another layer of unpredictability. But what might be difficult for a lot of players is that knowing the timing of when to actually get the platform cancel off. As you see here, if I miss the timing, let's say, I burn my dodge for nothing, right? But let's say, for example, if I have no dodge, then I can just spam my dash key to get a free dash cancel a platform cancel every single time. I would absolutely not recommend wasting your dodge just to get a more consistent platform cancel. But if you ever not have a dodge, then this is another way to mix up your opponent. Let's say my opponent is in this range and I have no dodge like this. I can hurtle myself towards my opponent like this off the platform. Or let's say I'm getting hit, I'm getting attacked, and I burn my dodge. I can use the platforms to get a quick platform cancel and get out of the way and reset back to neutral, back to safety. The very last advanced movement mechanic I want to mention is called stutter stepping, which is basically just inching yourself in a certain direction with your movement keys. It's really as simple as that, but this is something that the absolute highest level of players use, and it's a form of micro spacing. Don't worry about the terminology, I just want to mention this so that you can notice it when pro players do it. Basically, they're just managing the space, their spacing, right? The space between their opponent very, very finely. Another thing that stutter stepping can be really good for is baiting out attacks from your opponents. Again, this is like super high level stuff, but basically, if I'm moving all over my opponent, I'm trying to get into a good position, right? And then I start to inch towards them like this with stutter stepping, my opponent might take this as like, oh, I'm getting ready to come up and attack him, but really I'm not committing to anything, right? So he might preemptively throw out an attack, and I just take a step back and go back in for the punish. In Chapter 3, I will be talking about how to better use these techs in-game based on your weapons and legends choice. Remember, the purpose of movement is to actually put yourself in a good position to hit your opponent. But that begs the question, what actually is a good position to be in? Well, this is the essence of stage control. To put it simply, stage control is how much stage you control. Let's say I'm off stage, my opponent would have stage control. Why is this advantageous for them? Well, because your opponent, or I, would be under pressure because my options are limited. I can't dash off stage, and I have to expend jumps just to get back to the stage. Whereas the person who's standing on the stage has access to their entire kit. They have their whole grounded movement kit, they have all their jumps, all their recovery, and their dodge, right? This is why stage control is advantageous. The same thing applies to when I push my opponent to the corner, right? Here, in this situation, he physically has less room to move than me, so his kit is somewhat limited. The same thing also applies for if I'm juggling my opponent, and I'm the one closer to the ground. As you see here, I can fast fall to the ground and reset my options whenever I want, but the person who I'm juggling, they actually have to get past me if they want to do the same. Now, how does this relate to movement? Remember that Brawlhalla is a game about baiting and punishing. When you're juggling your opponent, you shouldn't just, wait for them to come to you and then the moment they get in your range try to hit them, especially if they have a dodge. If they have a dodge, anyone can react to you and just dodge through you to get to the stage, right? When you're in such an advantageous position, such as a juggle or an edge guard, it's a pretty good idea to use your movement and some hitboxes to throw them out, right? To bait out options from your opponent, to bait out a dodge so you can get a confirmed hit. For example, let's pretend that I have an opponent falling down from the ceiling. I can start to jump up to him to threaten him and act like I'm going to attack him by getting really close to him. He may jump to avoid me, right? He may jump. And now this is one less option he uses. Maybe he jumps again. Now he's out of dodges. To avoid me, maybe he uses his recovery. Now he has no recovery. And finally, maybe he uses his dodge to avoid me. Now this is my cue that he has nothing left, and now I can really actually try to hit him because it's confirmed, right? Another reason why stage control relates to movement is because when you have stage control, you physically have more room to move. If the opponent is on the corner and you have center stage and they choose to run up to me and attack me, I can very easily just dash out of the way to avoid it and then punish him, right? Whereas if I choose to attack them, they might be compelled to use their dodge to avoid this, right? Because they don't have as much space behind them to move, so they don't want to immediately just throw themselves off the stage, right? They might dodge. If they don't have their dodge, the only options that this person has to avoid my attack is to either jump, which this is something you can read by going in with a dash jump stare or like a dash end light, something like that, right? You can read it. Or they can just simply run off the stage, right? But the problem with running off the stage is now you set them up for an edge guard, and this is an even more advantageous position to be in. This is the essence of stage control and how it relates to movement. If you only take away one thing from literally everything I just said, it should be that if you have stage control, like for example, I'm center stage and they're on the corner, or they're being juggled, or they're off the stage, you have more freedom of movement to them than them, and you should use this to your advantage. But a good position is not only defined by stage control, but is also based on the weapons and legends that you are playing. I think the best way to illustrate this point is, just by giving you an example. Let's take the most visually obvious example I can think of with blasters. Blaster, sidelight, and Sair are some of your safest options for hitting your opponent in neutral because they have good range and are quick to start and stop, right? However, there is a huge dead zone in the middle of the move where the sidelight won't connect. This means that your movement should be with the intent of staying around a range where you can either dash sidelight in, right, to punish or approach, or if they come to you, you can dash away and sidelight, right? Or you can even do the same thing with Sair. You can do a fade away Sair or jump up and Sair, or a dash jump Sair, right? The main thing to avoid is being too close to your opponent, where if they choose to do something, they get in this dead zone where it nullifies the threat of your sidelight. The same thing applies to moves like Spear Endlight. It's a good move in neutral, but it has a pretty sizable dead zone where you can't hit stacked. So your movement should be with the goal of positioning yourself in a place where you can space out this Spear Endlight, right? Let's give another example with Axe. If you're looking for a kill, you're not really going to be looking for Axe Sidelight because it doesn't lead to a kill confirm unless they don't have a dodge, right? To get a kill with Axe, you might want to be looking for something like an Endlight or a Sair, which would be your main kill option. So instead of being super far away from your opponent, because this is where the range that Sidelight would hit, you might want to use your movement to get in a range where the Endlight might hit, or even better, the Sair might hit. Maybe use your movement to set up something like a dash dance, dash in Sidelight, or dash in Endlight punish. Something like a dash landing like that, boom, Endlight. Or maybe even something better, like a dash jump, dodge up, falling Sair. Something like that. The same exact concept applies to bow when your opponent is in kill percent. For example, you might want to be spacing out for a D-light because it leads to all your kill confirms. Hitting a sidelight at this range probably isn't as viable because it's a little bit harder to follow up on late damage sidelight versus an early health sidelight, right? Like on white or yellow. So your movement should be aimed to position yourself in an area where you can either D-light or dash D-light, right, for a kill confirm, or you can kind of use your dash jumps, right, to hop around them, bait out a whiff. The moment they miss you, fall on top of them with a nair, because again, that is a move that can kill. You can also use your dash jumps and recovery to catch a straight jump, something like that. One more example, because this is super important. Hammer has a big dead zone in its diagonals, so you want to move in a way where you're either to the side of your opponent, so you can land like your Endlights, Sidelights, D-lights, right on top of them. You can land some of the Endlight and D-light, right? You want to be maybe right above them so you can hit a dare, or right below them so you can hit a nair. But you never want to really be in a diagonal to someone when you're playing Hammer. That's your blind spot. However, something specific to certain legends like Cassidy, who has an end sig that covers the diagonals, mitigates this problem. So make sure you analyze the use cases of your legend signature kit, because it may just make you reevaluate how you move and how you position yourself in game. In chapter 4 of this video, I'm going to briefly go over some offstage movement. Now, offstage is very complex in Brawlhalla just because of how many options you have and the freedom of movement you have, right? But I will be talking about the basic recovery tools and ways to punish the most common recoveries back to stage. Let's start by reviewing your basic recovery options. Remember that you have 2 aerial jumps, a recovery, and a dodge. If your opponent is giving you a really hard edge guard, it might be a good idea to sometimes move to the other side of the stage. Remember that the dodge is on a timer, so actually if you're sent super far away from the stage, you can sometimes dodge first so that you can get your dodge back again in that 2.7 second time period by the time you get to the stage. You basically have 2 dodges in the same recovery, right? Just be careful for people who throw their weapon at you or people who chase you down, because in higher levels, they get a lot better at reading dodges off stage or punishing you for when you don't have a dodge. Again, if you use your dodge first, you still are completely vulnerable in this entire time period. Another option you have is what's called an exhausted recovery, which is basically using a recovery after you have already used your first recovery. And as you see here, on that last one, red particles will come out of my character. Exhausted recoveries take place of your jumps instead. Some exhausted recoveries are a lot better than others. The main notable ones are hammer, because it basically has the same function as a normal recovery, right? A recovery on hammer will, if I can input it, will send your opponent downwards, right? So sometimes if you go like this, you can actually surprise your opponent by doing a exhausted recovery, which if they get too greedy and try to hit you with like a ground pound or a dare or something, will actually reverse the edge guard. Another good one would be Blaster's exhausted recovery. This one is good for raw movement because although the main recovery has a lot more vertical momentum than the exhausted recoveries, you see how I go high with this one and I don't really go much higher with these. These do have a lot of horizontal momentum, so you can literally just fly across the stage with this or stall out like this. Of course, there are a lot of other use cases for each weapon that I did not mention yet, but you should try to find them for yourself. The next thing I want to talk about is that light attacks do not use up your options. Certain moves like gauntlets, lance, and cannon sair can be used to propel yourself back to the stage if you're sent very far. Furthermore, unarmed and Qatar dare can be used to move yourself in a diagonal direction, which is good for getting a last second wall touch like this, because this still counts as touching the wall and resetting your options. Just be careful because all of these moves that are used to propel yourself back to the stage, including, the unarmed and Qatar dare and these sairs, can all be read and punished, especially in higher elos. We will talk about this shortly. The last mechanic I want to talk about on the wall is wall slip. Basically, this prevents players from what is called wall hugging or sharking. If you do 5 jumps on the wall, you get 1 exclamation point, 7 gives you 2, and 9 jumps will give you 3 exclamation points. At that time, it takes away all of your options and you will slowly fall down to your death. The next thing I want to talk about is how to cover yourself if you have someone attacking you from above when you're trying to recover back to the stage. Something you can do is as simple as jumping and throwing out an attack. This will give out a hitbox that a lot of times will interrupt your opponent, and remember, if you hit your opponent, you actually get a chase dodge, so this can actually also help you get back to the stage, chase dodging back upwards. Like I said, you can also do an exhausted recovery, which is great for when you don't have enough time to do a jump attack. See, when I jump attack, I jump and then I attack. So the Nair hitbox comes out quite a big distance above me. But let's say the Bodvar is literally right on top of my head and he's about to ground pound me, or he's about to dare me and I don't have enough time to do a jump Nair. This is a good case for when I can do an exhausted recovery. See how the moment I do this exhausted recovery, it's an immediate hitbox that has a better chance at contesting the opponent right above me. The 2 best ones I can think of for contesting are like sword and hammer exhausted recovery, like I said before, but again, there are many, many use cases. Every weapon can do this pretty much. The last main way to cover yourself coming back to the stage is simply by jumping and throwing your weapon. Simple as that. I mean, honestly, this might be the best way to catch-all situation, how to defend yourself from recovering. However, if you don't have any of those things and you are in imminent danger, but you still have a dodge, something I would not recommend is dodging into the stage. You see, the moment you dodge into the stage, it cancels the invulnerability frames. If you see an opponent coming down for a ground pound, instead of dodging into the stage, what I recommend you should do is dodge up through the ground pound. This way you get the full value of your dodge by getting maximum 0.2 seconds of invulnerability time, and then you can do something to get back to the stage. Now, in addition to the nuances between the different weapons in moving offstage, some legends also have GC signatures that can be used to recover, such as Sidra Sword D-Sig, which is probably the best one in the game, Thor Orb N-Sig, and Volkov Scythe N-Sig, among many, many more. Okay guys, I swear this is the last thing I forgot to say, but every time you get hit by an attack in the air, even if you have no more jumps, you can get another jump. As you see here, right? I had no more jumps, now I got another one. This can be used as a standard jump, or it can be used as an exhausted recovery like all your other jumps. But the thing I wanted to say here is that one of the biggest mistakes you can do off stage is mashing jump when you're getting hit. When you get hit off stage and you have all your jumps, I would recommend you fast fall down to try and avoid future follow-ups, because it's extremely rare that your opponent will chase you down and read your fast fall in comparison to reading you mashing jump. If I were to have an opponent mashing jump here, I could literally dare into a dare, into a dare, into a dare, into a dare, and that would be the freest stock of my life. So guys, please do not panic. Remember how many movement options you have. If you get hit off stage, just fall, and you will be able to go back up again with a better approach afterwards. Now, to close off this video, I want to talk about some of the most common recoveries that you can punish in-game. Remember that some light attacks can be used to propel yourself towards the stage. Players in ranks as high as 2300, I've seen, will sometimes autopilot and use their light attacks right out of hit stun when they're sent off stage to Sair, so they want to get back to the stage as quick as possible, right? This is something that you should keep in mind when fighting weapons like gauntlets, cannon, and lance. Be ready for them to use their Sairs to move back to the stage right out of hit stun, so you can actually read it and punish it. For lance specifically, it's a good idea to sometimes save your weapon throw for when they have to use their recovery, because lance recovery is one of the most vulnerable movement options in the game, because if you're hit at all while you're using it, you completely lose the recovery and they will fall to their death. Now, there are three main ways that players will recover back to the stage. A lot of times they will either recover to the wall, they will recover high above you and try to get past you, or land on a platform, or they may try to go right through you with an attack, or try to dodge through you, something like that. I believe that recovering to the wall first is most optimal for the person recovering because, of course, you want to replenish your options first, and the wall is, the closest space to you, right? But you also have a lot of options to cover yourself, doing a jump attack or a jump weapon throw. It's a lot safer than recovering high without first touching the wall, because as you see here, my opponent has the entire stage below him to set up an edge guard, and I have limited options. To show an example as to why not recovering to the wall first, when you have a lot of your options, can be dangerous, here is a clip. Marckiemoo punishes the width with a hard sidelight, sending him off stage. At this point, Sandstorm uses a Gauntlet Sair to move himself a little bit closer to the stage. If Marckiemoo was a little bit closer, he would be able to punish that, but regardless, that's not really the point of this clip. What I'm trying to show is that he uses his first jump, he uses his last jump, and at this point, he still has a dodge and a recovery. But instead of going to the wall and just resetting the jumps, he chooses to jump and lock himself into a Sair. And Marckiemoo is already prepared for this. He has ample stage behind him. He dodges the Sair and sets up a D-Light to secure the stock. The main point I want you to take away is that at that point, Sandstorm had literally all of his options, but rather than going to the wall and playing it a little bit safe, he chose to go to the corner and try to interrupt Marckiemoo when he was just not there. In cases like this, where your opponent recovers high, there's actually a few places where they can commonly land. A lot of times if there's a platform, they will try to land on the platform, right? Because it's the closest place to them. Sometimes they will try to go all the way over you and land towards the center of the stage, which in my experience is a little bit less common. Or they will recovery, and then if they see that you're effectively guarding the center of the stage, they will fall towards the corner of the stage. In my experience, this is a little bit more common than going to center stage. In cases where your opponent tries to fly way over you, don't just sit there and wait for them to land. Remember, the theme of this video is you want to use your movement to bait and punish them. If they're going way over you, try to threaten them, get close to them, get them to use all their jumps, use their recovery, use their dodge. Once they have no options, now it's your cue to try and hit them. But again, in my experience, most players, when out of options, will actually try to return to the corner right here. And this is something that you can very easily abuse by catching their landing with moves like have a more vertical hitbox like Guitar Endlight or like Sword Endlight, something like that. The final recovery option that most players will try is to recover straight into you by either dodging straight through you, hitting you on the ledge, or sliding up the wall and doing some sort of attack, like a Guitar Sidelight, like that. If they dodge into you, this is an easy punish because they are literally just burning their dodge and running straight in front of you. I think this is a super easy thing to punish. The only time that this could ever go bad for you is if you prematurely attack on the corner. You get impatient and you throw out this attack, your opponent reacts to it, and they dodge through you. The same mistake applies for people who will hit you, right? If I prematurely attack, this just gives me an opportunity to get punished. My best advice here is to remember that when you are in an edgeguard situation, you're the one who has all of your movement options. Remember, you have stage control. Your opponent has to come to you. So instead of throwing out attacks and getting impatient, maybe try to bait them. Short hop. Show them, okay, maybe you should come up here. Maybe I'm not going to be ready to punish you, right? I'm going to short hop. Or maybe I'll take a step back or go back and forth and entice them to come up here, make it look like it's safe for them to return to the stage, and when they start to return, boom, attack them. Go back and forth, boom, attack them when they come up. The other option that I mentioned is that a lot of players in Diamond and above will try to do this thing where they slide up the wall and try to do a light attack like that. This is something that's like super telegraphed in my opinion. You can kind of see when someone's getting ready to do it because you have to position yourself in a certain way where you'll slide up the wall like that. So if you see them doing this, literally just remember, you have the whole stage behind you. Just take a step back and then punish them when they come up and try to hit you. Okay guys, that's the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this guide and learned something from it. When I first returned to YouTube, well, you know, I guess when I returned for YouTube the second time, because I quit and I return a lot, but I said I wouldn't make guides anymore, and while I still pretty much think that's going to be true going forward, you know, after reading old comments on my 2021 movement guide, I remembered the impact that it had on those who watched it at the time, as well as the impact of your guys' kind words on myself. Thank you again for that. I just wanted to come back for one last hurrah, and you know, I want to end my career on this side of Brawlhalla YouTube at my peak. So I put 110% into writing, filming, and editing a guide that I hope will become the gold standard for all future Brawlhalla guides on YouTube. The script was 10 pages, 10 pages long. Single space is kind of hard to even read that out. I didn't even realize how much I wrote. It was almost 6,000 words, and I wrote out literally every single word I said in this whole video, and it still took me like 3 hours to say because, oh my god, I'm just out of practice of making guides, okay? Well, anyway, I put a lot of time, effort, and soul into making this video, so please, if you enjoyed it, please give it a like and share it with someone who you think would also enjoy it. That being said, I'm closing this chapter of my career on YouTube and opening a new one, as I have already started making a different style of content. If you like funny moments compilations with music and a lot of laughter, then I would recommend that you check out some of my other recent videos. Right now, it's just Brawlhalla, but I plan to play other games with my friends as well. If you want to give me some feedback on this guide, not that, you know, I'm going to be making any more, but, you know, I'm always down to hear feedback, then leave a comment. Maybe if your comment has some really good advice that I missed, I would not hesitate to endorse it, so hopefully other people can also see it. Anyway, if you just want to give me, you know, if you just want to chat with me, or you can leave a comment, join the Discord server, the new Discord server, and follow my new Twitter account. I'll respond to you on any or all of those platforms. So, thank you again so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.